Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is the Healing Generations podcast as part of the Healing Generations Institute's effort to really lift up the medicine from the generations of ancestors and people that have come before us. At the same time, we recognize the duality. And so we are also in the process of healing generations of wounds and misconceptions and false narratives. So we're very grateful that you're joining us today. We want to begin by just taking a moment to take a deep breath and just allow all of us to gather here together. We want to thank Creator and all the ancestors that have come before us. We want to acknowledge them for their journey, for their gifts, for their sacrifice, for them not giving up, for their dreams, for their visions, and for what they have inoculated in us to be able to remember the sacredness of everything, but also on this journey recognize that there are wounds on the way that we are still trying to heal. And so we acknowledge you and your ancestors and all the roots that you come from as we come together in another time of ceremony, of dialogue, of journey. We are so blessed to be here. And we want to thank you and wherever you're at, the traditional people of your land, where you sit. I'm on the land of the Tongva Gabrielendo people, and want to thank all the people of all lands, of all ways, of all roots, of all persuasions as we come here together. In my language, we say in Cloque Nawak, in interconnected sacredness. And I am so blessed today. Just feel very happy and elated to have with us really a pioneer in this work, in this dialogue about healing and about transformation. In so many ways, she has guided and opened doors and really kind of stimulated, you know, often with a lot of pushback, I'm sure, new narrative and dialogue. And maybe it's not new narrative and dialogue, but it is sacred narrative and dialogue. Dr. Gail Christopher, is first of all a friend of mine, and I consider her a colleague and relative, and we're on this path together. But she has definitely spearheaded so much. She's, an award-winning social change agent, and her expertise is varied, but definitely around the social determinants of health and well-being. Related not only to everyday life, but also related to public policy and how systems do things and look at things. She is known for her pioneering work to infuse holistic health and diversity concepts within the public sector and within the policy discourse. And where I met Gail, I mean, we've known of each other and heard of her and seen her before, but where we really began this work was Gail was the senior advisor and vice president for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and she was the driving force behind an effort, a movement called America Healing, and the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation effort. And we spent many years in dialogue with other healing practitioners, praying and working and developing this narrative. But definitely Gail was at the forefront of all of this movement. And she's, obviously had many accolades along the way. And one of them is she received the Terrence Keenan Award from Grant Bakers in Health. She chairs the board of the Trust for America's Health. And she's the executive director for the National Collaborative for Health Equity. I want to welcome you, Gail, and thank you so much for I know you're so busy, but for spending the time with us to be able to share your legacy and your journey and the many wisdoms that you carry and have carried for many, many years. Gail, I want to open it up for you to welcome the listeners.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I feel like I'm with my brother. I'm with a dear family member and relative, and so I am deeply humbled and honored to have this precious time together. And I certainly welcome all those who are listening, who are giving us the gift of their attention during this precious time of sharing. I invite my ancestors to guide the words that I say and the thoughts that I have and the feelings that I express. I certainly welcome your comfort and your presence as I do often, and you always are there for me. So thank you to my ancestors, to our ancestors.
Mm.
I also want to welcome all those who are in the journey, on the journey, doing the work and believing that success is not only ours, but it is the success of this adventure in democracy. All of you out there who still believe in our sacred interconnectedness as a human family and our potential to express the very fundamental principles of democracy together. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for your work, and also pay homage to those leaders at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation who allowed this work to unfold under their auspices. A major philanthropic organization that committed itself to being the most effective anti-racist organization it could be long before that was popular, and had the audacity to hire me to come in from DC and definitely, supported this work across the country. And so every chance I get, I do want to honor and thank the leaders at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation who had that vision and that courage.
Mm. Well, I think part of the vision encouraged, and sometimes, people do brilliant things. And one of the brilliant things is they hired Gail Christopher to guide this. uh, but let's begin there. Let's begin by maybe sharing who is Gail Christopher, and tell me a little bit about your people and your ancestors and the people that you come from, that journey, because I'm sure it was a journey and it wasn't an easy one at times. So share a little bit.
Well, I should start by saying that I am here right now in Maryland on lands that were peopled by the Algonquin speaking tribes, indigenous Native Americans. Um, my family ancestry, my mother's family dates back to Alabama,
Hmm.
and her ancestors were enslaved in a small part of Alabama that I've only learned recently was actually a headquarters for the Confederacy.
Hmm.
And so in Pollard, Alabama was the name of the town. And so it was interesting that energy was in that place where she was born and raised,
Wow. Yes.
My father grew up in West Virginia. He was orphaned at a very early age. And I like to think that my mother's greatest gift was what the psychologists of late have called grit, determination. My mother used to say, because she was short, in stature, and she used to say, "I'm a little piece of leather, but I'm well put together. So don't mess with me." So that was her. And mom was one of 14 children, and she grew up. I saw the home that she was born in, and it was really almost like a log cabin. It was
Hmm.
really. Um, and she worked her way through life to become one of the 100 most influential women in America.
Wow.
And so she in doing so, she didn't have a lot of time for a lot of direct attention, to us as children. But I often say we become who our parents are. We listen less to what they say, but we watch what they do.
Hmm.
And I think I inherited that determination, that grit, as it were. My dad, having been orphaned, he was determined to keep his family together, and he was sent off to live with an uncle in West Virginia. He was born, I think, in Richmond, but he was sent to West Virginia to be there after he lost his mother. I think he was 2 years old, and some of the African Americans carried on the legacy of the beatings and the cruelty with children. And so he and his younger brother were subjected to that, at the hands of their uncle. And he escaped, literally.
Hmm.
He was gifted in music, in playing the harmonica, and just was a very sweet, gentle soul. he saved enough money from that to actually go back for his brother a couple of years later,
Mm.
and brought his brother out of that to Richmond. And so you get a sense of my father's love and determination and commitment to family, and my mother's coming from a large family of 14 children, but her determination, to succeed. And I think the combination had a lot to do with who I am, of course. I understand my great great aunt was an herbal healer,
Mm.
and whatever happened to someone in the family, she would go into the woods and come out with whatever was necessary for the healing to occur. And those stories were passed down, and in many ways, people said I reminded them of her. I embodied her energy. And as you know, Jerry, my entree into the healing world was to become a licensed holistic doctor, a naturopath, naturopath, and clinical nutritionist. And so for much of my initial time, my professional life was in clinical practice. I had thousands of patients in Chicago, but I realized that most of the people who needed the holistic services that I could offer, they simply couldn't afford it. And
Hmm.
so that's what moved me into designing social programs so that I could get foundations and the government to pay for them to get the services that they needed.
Mm. So where did you actually grow up, and how was that in terms of, I mean, when we talk about racial equity, when we talk about health and healing, I know a
Mhm.
lot of my framing and my consciousness came from what I experienced as a youngster. I grew up in Compton, South Central LA. I was, a young teenager during the Watts blowouts there in the '60s, and so that really framed a lot of how I saw justice or injustice. What
Mhm.
what did you grow up through, and what did you grow up seeing and experiencing that gave you the basis for a lot of your work?
Well, on a couple of levels. Socially, I grew up during the civil rights era. You know, I was born in 1950. And so, my early developmental years were right at the peak of that whole civil rights movement. Dr. King came and spoke at my high school when I was growing up. And, back then, most of what you saw on television on three channels, right,
Mhm.
was what was happening. Three black and white channels is what was happening, right? So my growing up years were very much colored by the civil rights era, per se, right? I remember there was an incident, actually a groundbreaking for a school, where there was a civil rights protest, and the protesters laid down on the ground, and they actually rolled bulldozers over and killed two of them.
Hmm.
And that was just one of those moments, in my consciousness that was very shaping. Um, we were what I thought was a middle class family, in the sense of we lived in a rented house that had three bedrooms on a tree lined street. And, this was, and it was a predominantly Black neighborhood, but it was a neighborhood that had lawyers and doctors and teachers. And, so we had a sense of possibility. Of course, my schools were all Black, were all African American, and most of the teachers were, but we always had this sense that we could do and we could become, and there weren't any barriers to that. But our doing and becoming had to be about justice. It had to be about fighting for equal rights,
Hmm.
because that was the tenor, if you will, of the day. This was the height of the civil rights movement, so that had a lot to do. On a deeper level, I was born with a congenital challenge. And so I spent many of my early years as a child growing up hospitalized and
Hmm.
seeing doctors and taking medication and having surgeries. And so, I kind of was in the belly of the world of traditional medicine, and much of that I rejected ultimately,
Hmm.
because I saw the repetition of the same mistakes, it seemed. And I just said, there has to be a better way.
Hmm.
And so prayer was a very strong part of my life, even as a child.
Hmm.
I would pray for guidance. I would pray for what to do. I remember one of the surgical interventions, they it didn't work, and they were keeping me in the hospital another 10 days, and they kept bringing me these drugs to take at night. And for sleep, and I just knew without knowing, I said, I don't need this. So I would pile the drugs up in the drawer, next to the bed. And the nurse came in one day and she saw all these sleeping pills that I hadn't taken, uh, but I think I'd been in there maybe 10 days and they were getting me ready to repeat the surgery that they'd done. And I said, well, my parents don't have any insurance. Jerry, they signed my discharge papers within an hour.
Oh my gosh.
So I remember thinking to myself, well, I thought I had to have this other surgery. So anyway, so I had an up close and personal child's eye view, of medicine, of health, of some of the inequities, and disparities in treatment. And it all helped for me to pray for more insight, for a better way. And that kind of helped to shape who I am. I grew up with two siblings, an older brother who was only 11 months older, and a younger sister who was 8 years younger. And left home when I was 17 to go off to college, just loaded up with scholarships and awards, and I knew then that I was leaving and I wasn't coming back to Cleveland, Ohio.
What sticks with me as you're speaking is, first of all, prayer, right? That the vibration, the energy, the faith that is deep in you. I mean, first time I met you, I felt that as you spoke. I mean, it's embody. You embody prayer, right? You embody the spirit. But the other part is that intuitive sense of things, right? That you knew something wasn't right here, right? So you give me the medicine, but I'm putting it aside. Something's not right here. And one of your ancestors guided you to say, "Do you know we don't have no insurance?"
Absolutely. I think I was 8 years old.
But your spirit knew
Yes.
that, and your body knew that this was not what I need in order for me to get well and get healthy. But the interesting part is that you needed to go through that in
Mm-hmm.
order to get an insight at a deeper level,
Yeah.
what so many people that look like us were experiencing in this so-called health system, the
Yeah.
inequity and the injustice, that so many people, even today, we see it in COVID, right? That our people are suffering at much higher levels because of the inequities, because of the generational trauma that we've experienced that have affected our health and well-being. And so it's interesting how early on your spirit knew this, and you knew this deeply, right? So I'm wondering how that then guided you in terms of, then you're going off to college, you're going up. What did that instruct you to do, and what was that next part of your journey?
Well, Jerry, I'm so glad you honed in on what I consider to be the most important insights for us as social change agents, for us as healers. We are always connected to other dimensions of life, that there are multiple dimensions of living. I look out at the trees in all four seasons, when the leaves fall and then when they come back in the spring. And I think to myself, how can we think that human beings are any different? That there's only one phase of our experience. There are multiple dimensions to everything that manifests. So the spiritual dimension has been important. It took me a while to name it as that. Growing up in a Christian family, my understanding of spirituality was prayer, right? But as my journey unfolded, I realized I studied African religion and philosophy. I got exposed to many of the other world religions, and so for me, I became more comfortable with the idea of spirit and of consciousness, and certainly of the power of our ancestral connections and their communications. All that surgery and all those challenges I faced as a child growing up had to do with what was an infant at 6 weeks of age, what was a diagnosis of glaucoma. And that was rare in an infant, And And I went through many, many iterations of interventions to help me see. And finally, when I was about 21, I actually prayed for healing for my eyes. And the message that came through to me then, that was as audible to me as my voice is to you right now, was love your eyes
Hmm.
as they are loved.
Wow.
And in that moment, the pain subsided, the pressure subsided, and I realized I had been given the gift of all healing, which is love.
Yeah.
And I had never loved my eyes,
Hmm.
right? I had
Hmm.
never loved my face. I had never loved, my brownness.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so in that moment of transcendence, I was given the understanding of that and the power of love. Years later, when I prayed for an understanding of what is true healing, right?
Hmm.
Um, I was given the understanding that the unifying concept that makes healing necessary, right, is the concept of stress and trauma. And when we are stressed and traumatized, our bodies believe we are separate, from the source of all that is good. And so, they can name it anything, right? They can
Hmm.
name it
Hmm.
glaucoma or cardiovascular disease or compromised immune system or diabetes. It goes on and on and on. But ultimately, it's the manifestation of the same misperception of
Hmm.
our disconnection from that which is our source of all life and all that is good.
Hmm.
So that's the insight that drives me in my work in many different forms and iterations.
You know, it's profound what you're saying, and I don't think that people truly understand. Based on what you're talking about, and the health ramifications of what you're talking about, of the impact that racism has had on us. When you are told that you are not someone to be loved, not someone that is beautiful, in fact, you are the opposite of that. You are not wanted. You're ugly. It's better if you're not here. You are a problem. You are the issue. You are dysfunctional. I mean, all these negative things, even to the extent of how we look and our skin color and our shape of our eyes and our hair. And when you hear that over and over and over and over, and it becomes a justification, and then it seeps into how people see you, and then it becomes justification for how people treat you, and then it becomes the systemic nature of things. I mean, I don't know if people even today really understand the generational impact that can have on people of color. So can you speak to that a little bit about, because I know, I mean, being a healer, being someone that understands also the kind of the medical health relatedness to that, people don't understand the impact, the devastating negative impact of racism.
Well, and I so appreciate the question, Jerry, and I also appreciate your life's work to counter that impact on so many different levels in so many important places,
Hmm.
like places of incarceration.
Yeah.
Um, it's a cellular dynamic,
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah.
It affects the metabolism, it affects the cellular regeneration, it affects the subcellular genetic regeneration in terms of the actual length of the telomeres,
Hmm.
within the cells that determine how many times the cells can replicate effectively. But I believe that our cells are designed to respond to our consciousness.
Mm.
And if our consciousness is one of rejection of ourselves,
Yeah.
then it's rejection of ourselves, and the cells respond accordingly, you know, whether it be in the form of malignancy or rapid degeneration or deterioration. And so, one of the most important interventions in terms of overcoming the legacy of racism and even health inequity, right, is this work of learning to love ourselves
Mm.
and learning to be in relationship with one another from a place of love and understanding. I think of myself as a holistic practitioner. And when I left the foundation, I moved to set up a center here in Maryland that is some acreage with some trees and some artesian springs. Because one way we can be reminded of our value and our sacredness is through our connections with nature, because nature embodies the divine, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a big part of the work. We have to learn to love and be loved and to love ourselves so that we can extend love to others, because it affects our health at a cellular level. There
Mm-hmm.
was a study that came out just last year where they looked at least 5,000 births, maybe more, in the state of Florida. And they were able to track the possibility of death or life of that infant, right? Based on the race of the physician that delivered that infant.
Mm-hmm.
And if that Black infant was delivered by a Black practitioner, the infant mortality rate was reduced by 50%. It was cut in half.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we talk about cultural competence and cultural
Mm-hmm.
awareness and communication, and that baby wasn't talking to that doctor
Mm-hmm.
on a verbal level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was about whether that doctor could essentially love that baby or
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
could welcome that baby into the world and
Mm-hmm.
go to whatever length was necessary to,
Yeah.
and even in the most complicated situations,
Yeah.
the survival rate was 50% higher.
Mm.
When I read that article, I was stopped in my tracks. I teared up. I was so thankful that someone had done the research to show,
Mm-hmm.
they call it physician patient concordance,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
but the fact of the matter is, everything you said, if you cannot love me, it's unlikely that you can be an instrument for my healing
Mm.
all the way from birth to the end of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why this work of racial healing, if we worked for the next 20 years, we're never going to have the numbers of doctors. You know what I mean? We have to
Yeah.
open up the hearts across these lines, these misperceptions, and we have to connect and understand that we are all an extended human family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking because my son and daughter-in-law just had a little baby boy, right, a month old. When I went to see him and meet him, you know, I held him and I told him, "Welcome home."
Yeah.
I'm your tata. I'm your grandpa. You have a family here. We love you. We're going to be here. And I, in front of him, and he was asleep. But I knew I was speaking to his spirit,
Yeah.
and I said, I promise to you that I will love you, and I'll walk with you, and I will be with you, and that you're welcome in this family, that you come from sacred people, and that it's so wonderful you've chosen two parents that are wonderful parents, you know and people may look at that and may have seen me and thought I was crazy, but I know that the way you look at somebody and even how you see them, the vibrational energy then manifest in them. And so the reason that gives me the strength to do this work and why I really acknowledge you for everything you've done is because I think about the children, and we work in schools, and I ask teachers and I ask administrators, do you even like these kids?
Yeah.
Do you even like these kids? I mean,
Yeah.
the kids, I mean, because I know that teachers talk to teachers and say, oh, you're going to get Tommy? Oh my gosh. Oh no, I had him last year. I'll pray for you because, and,
Yeah.
and, and so even before the child gets there, the vibrational energy of not being wanted or not being enough or not being smart enough, not being whatever is there and greets them when they arrive. And so for many of our children, they feel this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so I think what you're speaking is very profound. How is it that we can recreate and transform the woundedness, the fear that people have about loving one another, about acknowledging and accepting one another? And I know this is your lifelong work along with mine. I saw it as a clinical psychologist working with families, and just the sense that I would welcome them, embrace them, and regardless of what they were sent for, maybe been sent because of a child abuse, allegation, I still welcome that mama and that daddy and that grandma and those kids. I mean, so I think it's profound and it has major impact on everything that goes on. But I really appreciate you speaking to the deeper level of what really love really means in action, and what does it really means not only in transactional processes but also in transformational processes as well. So can you talk then a little bit about your work and
Mm.
and the work that you've done, that based on love, based on spirit, based on prayer, based on your experience in life, has now moved you into a place of doing direct work and guiding work and promoting and advocating for work around racial equity and transformation.
So I will, and I'll try to do the elevator version. But as you were talking about the children, Jerry, some of my earliest work was with the nation's schools.
Hmm.
Developed a K through 12. Back then, we called it multicultural education.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it was really a Trojan horse for me to talk about loving these children, and managing the classrooms in such a way that the child's basic motivational needs were met, and that they had a sense of security, that they had opportunities for self expression, and that they had a sense of their own creative capabilities and power. And that effort was called Americans All.
Hmm.
And it was a really big nationwide effort with a curriculum that was based on the history of all the different groups that had peopled America. Ultimately, that set of curriculum materials and teacher training, I trained thousands of educators in how to use those materials. Um, we sold that to Houghton Mifflin Company.
Hmm.
And so that was an important reminder for me of how, if you told all the stories, you changed the narrative, right? And you did, and they got a chance to get exposure to all the different human experiences together at one time. It just had this way of just cutting through the lie, right? The lie of hierarchy of human value, the lie of racism. And so that was sort of planting the seeds for what, became a different level of work over time. The work for me started with clinical and then program design like that. And there were many other programs that I designed along the way. And ultimately, I ran the Institute for Government Innovation at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government when this idea of government being bad was really starting to bubble up,
Hmm.
and the Ford Foundation put a lot of money into trying to give examples of how the government could really get it right, you
Right.
know. And I felt like we need Black people in that movement because we depend on government. Not only do we depend on the government, we also are employed most robustly in the public sector. So we can't privatize everything that the public sector does, So there was that era of work and a lot of work in public administration and public policy. And I'm leaving out a lot of pieces, but eventually it led me to being invited by the Kellogg Foundation to be a vice president there for food, health, and well-being. It was around the time that Katrina hit New Orleans,
Hmm.
and I saw my people standing on rooftops pleading, for help. And again, prayer. I remember getting down on my knees praying and asking, seeing that and seeing how it embodied the racism of this country, that these people were completely abandoned in this moment of devastation. And I prayed, please put me in a position to do something to help this country end racism.
Hmm.
That was my prayer. And it wasn't 2 weeks before I got the call from the Kellogg Foundation. So, so I always said to myself, Gail, you got to really think about what you pray for.
That's right.
And my dilemma was I was living here on this, property in Maryland, and Kellogg was in Battle Creek, Michigan, So my struggle was, well, I know that this land was given, my ancestors I knew this, right? And so how was I going to do both? And so I ended up, as you know, flying back and forth every week for
Hmm.
over 10 years.
Hmm.
Uh, but the work was always pulling this thread of how do I both mitigate and insulate people in terms of the effects of racism, but ultimately, how do we end racism? You
Mm.
know, it's sort of like for me, it was a journey of mitigation and insulation and treatment and response. But ultimately, when I grew up, I was able to say, you know what, we got to stop trying to deal with just the effects. We also have to deal with the cause.
Mm.
And racism ultimately is a way of thinking, it's a way of believing. And it's a set of ideas that have been enshrined in a false narrative upon which this country was built.
Yeah.
So the work of truth, racial healing, and transformation, and of America healing, its precursor, was really changing the public narrative, the public discourse, finding a way to shift. It was really helping to build a critical mass of support for the work, which is what we call racial healing and relationship building. And then it was and is dealing with the systems that have been used to structure and embed this false ideology, the systematic ways. And we know it's through separation geographically and racially, and the many iterations of that, everything from taking children from their families, and institutionalizing them. But separation is a mode of maintaining racial hierarchy. And we know it's embedded in our legal system, all facets of our legal system, criminal, civil, judicial, the voting. And we also know that it's the fuel, the driver of our economy.
Mm.
So those are the 5 pillars of truth, racial healing, and transformation, changing the narrative, telling a true story of who we are as a human family. It's not just going back and identifying all the atrocities, because if you get stuck in the past, you're stuck in the past.
Mm-hmm.
This work starts with a vision for a different future.
Mm-hmm.
We document the atrocities, but we don't get stuck there,
Mm-hmm.
because that's re-traumatizing, right? And then it's the relationship building and the racial healing, the actual building of the connective tissue and the glue that holds us together as a society. And then together mounting the work that we have to mount to change the systemic practices and policies so that our children do inherit a very different future.
Mm-hmm. As we, embrace this, we come out of 4 years where we've seen, some really ugly sentiments. If you talk about truth, we saw truth really revealed itself in terms of separation of how people think, their narrative, their view of people of color, of their hate of certain sectors of the population, and a true belief that is very separating and not healthy. What is the basis of that from your viewpoint? What is talk about, we got to get it at the root. So what is the root of that? Why is that so strong, and why is that so rooted, if you will, in people's thinking and people's way of dealing with life?
We've never dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was the Civil War or the Civil Rights era or Reconstruction or the destruction of Reconstruction, we've never done the consciousness work, Jerry.
Mm.
We've never held up this lie to the light of the sun and called it a lie.
Mm.
We have never acknowledged that fundamental fallacy is the basis upon which this society was constructed.
Yeah.
We tell ourselves that, we all are created equal in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we never considered all in that, in terms of the founding fathers. And so there's never been a concerted national effort at telling that truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on a more granular level, you had the refuting of that in the presidency of Barack Obama, and you had this elegant and eloquent and brilliant first family that denied the fallacy of white superiority. And it just, because we've never gotten rid of that undergirding fallacy, it upset people.
Mm-hmm.
They just could not handle seeing this Black family, in what is the highest position of power in the land. And so once that was sort of opened up, if you will, that wound was opened up, then you had someone who has understands the power of consciousness manipulation and emotional manipulation, and who had the luxury of a platform, you know, of something like a social media platform, that this message could just be driven home,
Mm.
right? And so you just had this perfect storm of fear and anxiety and deep-seated unaddressed racial bigotry, and then it was stoked and manipulated by someone who was a master at manipulation. And fear, was stoked. There've
Yeah.
been some analysis of the financial situation of those who stormed the Capitol, and almost all of them were either in dire financial straits or bankruptcy.
Mm.
And so again, the stoking and this manipulation of fear and insecurity, and it being blown up and magnified 100 times over. I really feel like the Twitters and the Facebooks and the social media leaders, they really are to be held accountable
Mm.
for allowing, the gift of their platforms to be so manipulated and so misused for so long. And somehow they have to become engaged in the correction,
Mm-hmm.
in the consciousness correction.
Yeah.
And that is a work that I pray for help in making sure that that happens, because
Mm.
we have to do that work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I think you started off by talking about truth, right? And that we really never acknowledge the truth, and in the work that we do, that I do, I always talk about that the first step of healing is acknowledgement.
Yep.
You have to acknowledge the truth, right? And we're not even at the first stage, right? We as a country, as a nation, as a world, if you will,
Yeah.
we have not acknowledged the truth. And there's a duality in truth, right? And you mentioned woundedness. We have not acknowledged the woundedness that many of the founding fathers of this nation brought with them, and used as the basis for their hierarchy of value, right? So when you're wounded, you construct then things that are wounded. And so
You do.
if you call it democracy, or the whole systemic nature of things, is based on fear, and based on woundedness, and based on people in a lot of pain, and it doesn't justify their behavior. But I think, to your point, the aspect of truth telling, and allowing, setting up a process by which we can now begin to tell the truth, so that the second stage can happen, which is now we can begin understanding, right?
Well, one of the things my patients taught me in my years of clinical practice, was the power of denial.
Hmm.
And I used to say, denial's not just a river,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in Egypt or in Africa. It is, in fact, a very powerful psychological tool for
Right.
protection.
Hmm.
And there's denial of fact, denial of consequences, denial of implication, but
Hmm.
ultimately it's denial of the feelings that undergird that.
Right.
And I learned, and that informs the approach that I use in terms of racial healing. People can move past denial when they feel and believe that they have the resources for coping. And that is why doing this work in the ways that we do it, where we create the compassionate spaces, we put our arms around one another. We create this environment of trust and love and affirmation, because we know that it is only with those things in play that we can actually help people to move beyond denial, of the things of which they are so afraid.
Hmm.
It's going to take doing this at scale.
Yeah.
It's not just enough to have conversations, about race. You really have to bring people into circle, and you have to provide the places and the spaces of comfort and compassion that will allow us to journey together, you know, through our denial and through the power of our emotions, which keeps us apart.
Hmm.
And when we do that work and do it well, the answers are with us.
Hmm.
And the likes that of which we saw over the last 4 years, there won't ever be that vulnerability again to allow that to come in and manipulate our unexpressed emotions.
Hmm. You know, as you're speaking, I see this dichotomy of looking at life, because I think that that many of the people, and actually it's been kind of integrated into society, that you have to control everything, and you control your destiny, and you control other people,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and that's going to make you successful and healthy, and then there's this other narrative that I hear you talking about in terms of trust
yeah.
and love and spirituality and manifestation of things, right? And there's such a crevice in between both of those, because what I see is that when we begin to believe and trust in each other's goodness, believe and trust in each other's love for each other, believe and trust in each other's potential to recreate a relationship, and it could be one-on-one first, and then it's a community, and then how do you infuse that in a system, that when you can transform all those fears and all that need to control and all the fears that is below that and the woundedness, then we can begin a different type of relationship. And I think that really is the basis of the work that you have done, and the basis of racial healing
It is.
is that, can we create spaces for us to acknowledge each other and acknowledge the dual sides of the blessings, but also the pain, and leave room for both without judgment, so that then we can choose to collectively then transform them, not individually, not with blame, not with shame,
Yep.
but with a sense of, do we want to do this together? Can we collectively commit to a better way of looking, changing the narrative, a better way of living, but also the advocacy that is necessary to change a system that is based on, fear, and based on that hierarchy of value, and based on, not on health and well-being, but based on survival and many times addictive patterns. And so I want to lift that up, because that's the basis of the work that we're doing and that you've guided for many, many years. We could talk about this forever. There's so much more to unpack, but I want to get to another level, and I want to talk to your spirit, Gail, because I know there's so much below all this work that is really spirit guided and spirit led, right? And I think this is what the civil rights movement was not. We're so busy in that movement, just advocating and surviving and living, because it was that, I don't know if the messages of spirituality and interconnectedness and values, was conveyed to the next generation. But I think we need it now. We need that for, we see our young people advocating and out there marching and protesting. And it's so wonderful that we have these wonderful leaders, young leaders that are fearless,
Yeah.
but I know that unless it's rooted and grounded in some spiritual concepts, some values, and some foundational elements, that it's going to be difficult really to transform a society that is, sometimes very toxic. So I'm wondering if you could share what you feel, can give some counsel as an elder, because you're an elder and a wisdom keeper. What are the elements of counsel that you would give to that next generation as we move forward, as we do this work and try and transform a society that reverberates more with love?
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much for bringing in what I consider to be the essence of our work, right? I think the lessons or the advice that I would give is to see it already done,
Mm,
because we our worlds become the outpicturing of what we believe and what we see, right? And so, when we did the work together on TRHT, we started with the vision,
hmm
right? And it wasn't a vision of what if, it was a vision of what is, right?
hmm
What is this new transformed America? What is it? How does it feel? What does it do? What does it say? What's its story? So I think it's so important to be in the consciousness of the transformation, because that's the only way it's going to be brought into being. It's going to come into being from our consciousness, from our ability to imagine, to image it, to bring it into being. So that is some of the most important guidance I give. And it's tough because when you're an advocate, you're focused on what's wrong, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have the presence of mind to know that you have the power. So that's one piece of advice I give. Another is I really am appalled by the phrase dehumanize, right? Because it suggests that anything in the material world has the power to take away our humanity.
Mm.
And that's part of the lie, right? These folks may have thought they were dehumanizing, but they couldn't take away our humanity. Our survival was rooted in the humanity that we maintained and we extended, and we became the humanity, if you will, of this nation in our spirits. And so, I hear young people, use the phrase, well, we're going to rehumanize. Oh, no, 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 no. They didn't take away your humanity. No one can do that. They didn't give it to you, so they
Mm-hmm.
can't take it. It's just not, So that's one of the phrases I just want us to get rid of, right? I just read a report from UNESCO when they were talking about all the dehumanizing of slavery. The
Mm.
cruelty, the brutality, all of that. But you never, ever, ever touched our humanity,
Mm.
which is why we are here
Mm.
to lead you into our collective humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be another message. And the other message would be just, know that we are loved.
Mm-hmm.
Know that this journey is not being done in isolation. We are not alone, and we always have in a tangible, all we have to do is call on it, the guidance of our ancestors. They are there, they are with us every single step of this journey. And if your consciousness, young people, is such that you don't understand that, then I would say take some time, go sit with some elders,
Mm.
allow experiences that will open your hearts to the knowing
Yeah.
of the strength
Mm-hmm.
that is in your ancestral line, that is part of who we are. And no one, no thing, no one, no prince or principality, what they say, it's nothing can take that away.
Mm.
And those would be my messages.
Wow. Yeah. It as you're talking, it reminds me of, as a young person, I was so invigorated with trying to change the system and trying to change things, and so upset and angry at the system and the white people and all kinds. And I would come home and my grandma would be there, right?
Uh-huh.
And she would see me and she'd say, sit down, sit down. She'd tell me in Spanish, sit down here, eat something, right? I, and she was, ¿qué tienes? What's the matter? Nothing. I just all in. I just sit down and eat. Come here. Come here and watch TV with me, right? And then there was the three channels, right? The three channels, black and white. But just
Yes.
sit down and watch TV with me. I don't want to watch TV. No, you understand what's going on, and what I didn't realize is what she was trying to do is try to connect me with her,
Yeah. Calm your spirit.
calm my spirit.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you would see her just kind of shake her head, aye, and she'd look up like that, and you look up like, oh God, help me with this new generation here, because they don't realize, that you are present and that I am present in their life. And as you said, the ancestors are present here. And I think that one of the um, most significant wounds that society has given us is to try and disconnect us from that.
Separation.
That's right. The disconnection from that.
Yeah.
And so your words are profound and they're very relevant to today. And I think that the message that you've given for so many years and that you continue to give, and that you've stimulated in so many other people after you that are now giving that message. There's so many other people giving that message because of, the collective work that you have led and that we have done over these years. But Gail, I really just want to thank you from the ancestors. They're channeling through me to say thank you
Mm.
for who you are, and what you share, and the battles that you've had to fight, and the truth that you've had to speak that has not been easy, that many days has made you tired and has affected your health and has affected your well-being, but you didn't give up. And I want to thank you for, for being willing to share all those teachings with others so that the reverberation can magnify throughout this country and throughout this world. And, and let you know your job is not done yet. We still got a lot more work to do, So I want to just offer you any last words you'd like to offer to the audience as we close up today.
Just appreciation, Jerry, for your friendship, for your being a colleague, being a partner on this journey, without ever saying a whole lot to each other, just having that exchange, that spiritual connection, knowing that we were doing this work and doing it together. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being that brother that, didn't let any cultural or racial or language or experience, be a barrier to us working in a complementary way to do this, right? To be credible in so many circles with so many people. And I love this opportunity to sit and share from my heart and my spirit. I do a lot of podcasts, but I can't think of another one. That was so real,
Yeah.
So I'm really, and I'm glad we had a chance to have this conversation.
Yes. And again, I look up Dr. Gail Christopher, and I know she's working on a book, so that's going to be coming. You want to mention anything about that book that you're
Well, the
working?
book will be out, I believe, in July. It's called RX Racial Healing. The subtitle is A Guide to Our Shared Humanity. And it's really a handbook for doing racial healing circles in the way that, that we've talked about. Some of it is autobiographical in terms of my journey to get to where I thought this is the right way to do it. But a lot of it is definitely, the how-to, the guide sheets for doing it. And so I'm hoping that it's being published by the Association of American Colleges and Universities. So it'll be accessed through them, I think.
Wonderful. Well, look for Dr. Christopher's book and, for all of her work. I mean, if you're interested in any of this, you can definitely look her up. And there's a lot of touch points of being able to connect to this work as well. I just want to those that are listening, really challenge all of you to love one another and to integrate love into your work, but also to integrate truth into your work as well, because that first step is speaking the truth. And we can be very strong in advocating for truth and even speaking truth to justice, but we can do it with love, right? We can do it strongly with love. We don't have to do it with hate or with anger. We can do it with love. And I think that's what Gail is sharing with us today and what the ancestors are sharing through her. But we want to thank you, want to thank you all for listening. Continue to listen, share this podcast with others, and share us your feedback as well. As we continue on this journey to not only heal generations, but lift up the medicine that is deep within us and our ancestors so we can honor them that way. May you have a blessed day and continue on this journey. We thank you very, very much.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.